Okay, so maybe we'll begin because it's a little bit after 9 and I want to be conscious of everyone's time. First of all, welcome. Thank you very much for making some time in your day to spend it with us on a webinar concerning energy management services, something very near and dear to our heart. We have two very interesting speakers today, Sarah Turner and Francesca Pedri. They're both significant players in our international project management team. And Sarah's got tremendous experience, and Francesca as well, in onboarding clients and managing complex engagements. We thought it would be interesting, particularly for those who haven't been through the process, to maybe get a view of what we see as best practices in transitioning between vendors. These two people have a great deal of experience in doing it. So without too much more ado, I'll turn it over to our speakers for the day, Sarah and Francesca.
Thank you, Richard, and hello everyone. Thank you for joining today's session. I'm Sarah Turner. I'm an international project manager based out of our US headquarters in New Jersey. I have been with the NUS team little over 10 years and have a specialist focused in onboarding complex client engagements.
Hi everyone, good morning or good afternoon. My name is Francesca Pedri and I'm also an international project manager at NUS. I joined the business about a year ago and I work predominantly with industrial clients that have a global footprint but are actually often European focused. I have been a project manager for around 10 years and I started my career in the rail industry and I moved into finance and now in energy. Okay, so why are we here today? Essentially, Sarah and I would like to give you some insights and an overview into what success looks like for a global energy management program. Okay. So the way we've decided to structure the session is that Sarah is going to give a little bit of an introduction into what we do, what NUS does, and an overview of the topic. And then to try and keep it as clear as possible, we've split the rest of the webinar into two core sections. So the first is best practice around the planning phase. And when I say planning, I mean creating a strong foundation of information and shared goals in your own business, then trying to understand and map your portfolio so that you know where all your sites are in one, nice, neat list, and which utilities, which, gas, electricity are coming into each site. Because that kind of information is fundamental to defining the services that you are going to require. Okay. And then we're going to move on to the transition phase, which is all about onboarding. It's about transferring data to your energy consultant. It's about building processes that you're going to use in the day-to-day running of the program and putting structure around the data so that you can visualize it and you have kind of one source of truth is how we like to put it at NUS, to then build an energy management strategy and make smart procurement decisions.
And what you'll see during today's session is a few common themes running through the topic of global transition and implementation. We'll talk today in detail around why stakeholder alignment and internal organization is so important when you're either thinking about implementing a new program or transitioning to a new vendor. Similarly, as Francesca's just touched on, understanding your business needs and what your sites and your portfolio really need from a consultant is key to getting a good program off the ground. Of course, NUS, we are biased, so we understand what it takes to be a good partner for a global program. And so we'll touch on how an international team with local expertise can often be the key to unlocking those services and delivering what you require. And then, of course, preparation and planning. So we'll touch on it throughout today's session, but what you'll see emerge is really having that ability to be organized and rely on your consultant to ensure that you quickly move from implementation to steady state. And then finally, as Richard referenced at the beginning of the session, we think strong project management is really important. Francesco and I are part of the international project management team who are responsible for coordinating the types of programs that we're really focused on for today's session. Now, to set the scene a little bit, I'm sure many of you that have joined today's session are aware of NUS, but it would be remiss of us not to give a short introduction. NUS was founded in the US in 1933, and today we have 16 international offices, which are fully staffed with close to 350 energy professionals. That includes energy consultants, project managers, analysts, traders, and data specialists that are supporting around about 1,600 commercial and industrial organizations. Our services that we'll come on to in detail today include a broad range of energy-related activities, from data management through to procurement and risk management, audit and analysis for cost optimization, budgeting, market intelligence, and of course, sustainability. Those services packaged together and delivered at a local level with centralized oversight are really the key reasons why large international organizations choose NUS as their partner. Now, for a little bit of credentials or background regarding NUS's experience with international and global implementation. What we have found in the last several years, particularly post-22 energy crisis, is that international organizations want a more centralized focus when it comes to their energy spend category. So over the most recent 24-month period, I would say we've had real success in onboarding very large organizations. For today's session, what we thought we would do is just take a sampling of those international organizations. So some statistics related to 10 clients that we've onboarded in the last 2 years. Our average onboarding time is just 34 days. And during today's session, we'll explain how we managed to kind of meet that statistic. For the sample data set, we have onboarded close to 4,500 individual client locations, and the electricity consumption for those sites is more than 3.5 terawatt hours. In particular, for the client data set, and a very common theme for NUS is that there is a real global reach when it comes to these clients and the clients that fall into our international project management category. For the sample data set, we have onboarded sites in 42 different countries. But on a broader scale, for our clients today, we are supporting in 61 individual markets. So we have real range when it comes to that international coverage. Of course, for us, it's quite easy to join a session like this and discuss our credentials, but to offer support to our services, a number of clients have shared testimonials for today's webinar. Common theme again relates to NUS's proactivity, organization, and level of support that we offer. Again, we'll talk today about how NUS understands that making a decision regarding transition to a new vendor is not easy. And so we try and be as collaborative and cooperative as is possible during onboarding, giving you the confidence to start a new program.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Sarah. Apologies. But you hit on something I thought was very important. In our experience, and particularly my own experience, throughout the onboarding, sales and onboarding process, probably one of the questions we get the most is that how long will it take to onboard? That always seems to be the recurring theme. And I think you touching on what the average time has been in our experience with different clients is very valuable because that's always a recurring theme. How much time, how much overlap do I need? What's the sort of run up and onboarding? So I think that's a very valuable piece of information.
The 10 clients that were referenced in our sample data set are references of NUS, as are the client testimonials here today. So if you have any questions or you want to speak to an NUS client about their experience, we'd be very happy to share information afterwards.
Okay. So following on perfectly from Richard's comment, actually, success starts with the planning phase, and how successful it is and how speedy it is all captured in this kind of initial part. So then the key kind of 3 areas we're going to talk about next is ensuring you have stakeholder engagement and alignment, making sure you understand your property portfolio, and how do you go about defining those service requirements that are going to set you up for success in the future? Okay, so number 1, internal stakeholder engagement and alignment. So when I use the word alignment, I mean that everybody in your organization, your team, and also your consultancy team is working towards the same end goal. You're moving in the same direction, and people understand their part within that process. And when I say engagement, I mean that people are obviously very enthusiastic about what they're doing, but also being as collaborative as possible. So a project's success depends on this. And usually the first thing you have to do is put in place a lead sponsor. So from NUS's experience, this is typically someone from the procurement team if you manage your processes centrally, because they have an overview of energy requirements across the business and usually an understanding of your property portfolio. But it's very dependent on the size of your business. You may nominate an operational individual who's based in a particular country, or even is responsible for a particular site, okay, if you have a more decentralized model. But I think fundamentally, the key thing is that there is someone within your organization that has authority to make decisions, has influence within the business, and is often involved in strategy. And, fundamentally, again, sorry to repeat the word, knows who they need to involve in this program. So you can see kind of a little bit of a breakdown in the blue boxes of who we believe the key typical stakeholders are. But you've got to consider finance because they control the budgets and they track spend. Engineering, really fundamental to communicate clearly what's happening from the start, because their site level insights are going to direct future procurement strategy because they know what's going on at the location. And then the sustainability team, who will have numerous reporting requirements to do with carbon and general sustainability reporting. So I think communicating clearly from the very beginning why you're doing this, what you intend to do, and how everybody plays a piece within it will make things smooth, because everybody knows what it's like to try and get information from colleagues and how challenging it can be, particularly on a global scale. But if from the beginning people feel involved and they have clarity, you're more likely to get what you require to make your program thrive. Actually, Sarah, I know this is a bit off the cuff, but thinking about the fact that you've seen dozens of transitions, when it comes to onboarding, are there any kind of struggles that you can put down to the fact that there's been a lack of stakeholder engagement or alignment?
It's a good question. And I think kind of going back to something we referenced earlier, it's not an easy decision to either move a global program or to start a program and start an outside engagement. So ensuring that your teams have confidence in the decision-making process that has been taken can often be a real strength and pays dividends later on. We understand nobody wants to be a program sponsor for an initiative that might ultimately fail. And so making sure that you have everybody on the same page and having a clear line of decision-making authority is a real benefit to a program. Again, not just drawing on implementation, because from NUS's perspective, these are long-term engagements that we have with our clients. And so having the right foundation for a program is really key critical.
Maybe if I could add, one thing that always occurred to me that's always helpful, as you rightly point out, there are many stakeholders on both sides when we engage into a new program. But having a champion on the side of the client, somebody who's coordinating and, as you said, aligning the different stakeholders, but acting as that focal point, who kind of steps up and takes some sort of leadership on that transition. For me, it's been in my experience, and I'm curious to get from you guys, has been a real help in onboarding, and certainly condenses some of the timeline as we're going through the process. Um, I think the more difficult ones have been when there are lots of stakeholders and they're very diffused in their responsibilities and trying to figure out who's responsible for what. When there's a single person who's sort of coordinating on the new client side, acting sort of as a gateway, that always seems to me to be very helpful in moving the process along in a very streamlined way.
Absolutely. And that's a really interesting, probably data point for us to measure. When there's a real strong champion, the number of days that onboarding is reduced by, because it does make all the difference.
And actually, sorry, just to add one more thing, not to be cheesy or corny, but when we were preparing for this webinar, one of our colleagues said to me, something that's really key for a project sponsor is to share the benefit, to show the benefit to stakeholders of how this program will help them, because it's more inspiring than just saying, please give me this long list of information. I need it now. So just wanted to mention that. Okay, so now this is my favorite point to remember when it comes to organizing. The best practice tips here are fundamental. So it's really key to understand the status of your portfolio. If you own your site, fantastic, congratulations. But is it in a deregulated market or is it in a regulated market? Perhaps you lease your site and you still have control over putting a contract in place for electricity or gas with the supplier of your choosing. But there could be the situation where you lease a site and you don't have that control. You are relying on your landlord to procure energy for you, and you pay them monthly, annually, even quarterly. Okay, but depending on where your sites are and the structure around this will really impact the service offering that a consultant like NUS can provide. Okay, for example, if you own your site and you're in a deregulated market, or you lease a site and you have control over purchasing, we can offer you a full suite of services. We can undertake the tendering, do your purchasing, budgets, analysis and audit work, and obviously data collection. But if you are having multiple sites or any sites in a regulated market that's highly restrictive, or you don't have any purchasing control, that kind of rigidity prevents us from offering you the full suite. So we would have to focus rather on data management. So we can give you an overview of say your consumption and your spend, but it would limit us in being able to add value beyond data management. Okay? And whilst you're gathering this information, also, and it sounds simple, take a note. Does every site have power? Where is natural gas? Where is water? Are you getting deliveries of energy? And there's quite a useful tip on the bottom right-hand side of the screen that talks about collecting information as you go. So what Sarah is going to talk about later is kind of the information that we require when we do the transition of a client to NUS. But it really helps from the very beginning if you're researching within your own business where everything is and the status of each portfolio company or site, to gather documents in the process. And then we can tailor the results.
Exactly. Yeah, and Francesca's overview there feeds in really nicely to service requirements. But talking about, data collection, one of the things, particularly Richard and I see a lot in talking with international organizations that maybe have solicited input from other consultants is oftentimes consultants will be very eager to overpromise on delivery. So if you have a large facility in China, NUS tries to be as transparent and open about the type of service we can deliver in a heavily regulated market such as China versus a totally owned site in Germany that is a manufacturing plant where we could offer up all services. So really that planning in that step 2, again, benefits the defining of your service requirements and ensures that when you are soliciting bids from consultants, whatever it may be, that you're getting a true reflection of what can actually be delivered. For the NUS, from the NUS perspective, when we think about clients defining service requirements, of course, this is where collaboration really does come into it. And again, we are able to support in defining the appropriate services based on your property portfolio and your commodity requirements. A little bit of a moment here just to review NUS's services. We bracket out our services generally, but all of our programs, particularly our global programs, always start with invoice management. That is the cornerstone of any strong energy management sustainability program. And from NUS's perspective, that includes collection of invoice data, processing and validation of energy invoice charges, and providing access to reporting through our online tool, NUS Direct. And then utilizing all of that data for analysis, really focusing on non-commodity cost optimization, elimination or exemptions related to energy taxes, and subsidies and general rate optimization for the relevant market. Of course, for our global programs, much of the day-to-day work is embedded with purchasing. So that can include electricity and gas procurement activities, risk management and trading activities, and then, of course, overall energy budgeting and tracking of budget performance. Our overarching services include sustainability and energy efficiency that are supported by our central team in the UK and cover a really broad range of topics there, from on-site generation through to decarbonisation roadmaps and European and international compliance work. Ultimately, once you have covered those initial steps in the planning phase, we then move into the broad overview. So from NUS's perspective, that often then moves into, again, that final service review, legal analysis or contract particulars, and then ultimately, once the service agreement is finalized, moving into transition.
Yep, perfect. I guess just to summarize the end of the planning phase chapter of this webinar, you appoint your key stakeholder and you enthusiastically get on board all the teams within your business to support this project. And then you do a stock take, you identify what's where's your water, where's your gas, which country are your sites in, and then we're ready to go to transition.
And in the transition phase of today's session, we're really going to be talking about roles and responsibilities for transition, the role of your organization, and ultimately what model implementation looks like from NUS's perspective. This session part of the session really is covering NUS's view and experience. Happy to answer any questions as we go through. But all transition and implementation projects managed by NUS start with data and information sharing. This phase of onboarding really is a get to know you stage and requires some really important data points and information to be transferred. That will include the site list that you develop during your planning. It will be a definition of who your project team is. Are you very centralized? Or do you have local stakeholders that want to or really do need to be involved in the onboarding as well as the steady state? And then, of course, it's the historic energy invoices, supply contracts, position reports, etc. And this is a really key part of onboarding because, again, it is a get to know you. We understand this can be quite a daunting phase of onboarding, particularly for any organization that may previously have been tracking energy consumption in Excel files or very locally. That happens more often than you might expect with global organizations. But as long as we are very transparent and collaborative during this initial data sharing, then we can move the project forward on a rolling basis. So from NUS's perspective, we do not wait for the information and data sharing phase to be over before we pick up, the work. Implementation happens on a rolling basis, and where we can provide assistance, we absolutely will.
I think one of the key ways we can provide assistance is showing a heat map. What information have you provided us? Where are there gaps? And so as we go, I think it's probably one of the huge benefits of having particularly an international project manager is that we're there to walk through everything with you.
Forgive me for interrupting again, but I think one thing that's probably worth mentioning at this point in time, and you may be mentioning it in the near future, but I'll jump the gun a little bit, is that the scope of the amount of data that we're talking about as we're onboarding is unique to every client, right? It could be a manufacturer with 25 sites in 7 different countries. That's a certain amount of data. It could be a retailer with thousands of sites, but each one is unique. And in a way, having been through each of the onboardings allows us to understand exactly the most efficient way to go through that process for the next client. Thousands of sites for a retailer may sound daunting, but in a certain sense, if they're all collected with a single supplier in a country, then it's not so bad, right? So having gone through this and building that experience level allows us to understand how to do it. So that's an important part. None of this for us is sort of new precedent. This is something we do every day, and we're learning from it and improving the process.
Absolutely. And to Richard's point now, we will in a moment just come on to what that looks like and what support we do provide for these types of projects. But again, to visualize maybe a little bit what the work streams look like during the initial week or so of the transition, you can see here in that kind of pinky purple that the client responsibilities that we have during onboarding are pretty condensed. So again, it's very much that information sharing. And from there, ultimately, additional work streams open up. And then we really start to take a look at, where NUS can add immediate value, where we can immediately launch initiatives and projects. So the data piece is very important, but is used across the NUS project team. Maybe if I just jump forward a moment, again, this is kind of our model implementation, and really going back to that data point we referenced earlier, our average onboarding time is 34 days. This for us, it's kind of how we demonstrate that value add and we believe that 34 days onboarding is way ahead of industry standard. And so here is just a little bit of insight into really how we do that. And as you might anticipate, week one is very much operational setup. So we introduce the NUS central project team. Typically, that introduction happens with the client's own central team as well. So going back to that program sponsor. We then publish our welcome guide, which every international client receives. That document really helps to socialize the idea of the NUS program within your own business and help stakeholders kind of get on board with what the next month will look like. We then, of course, schedule weekly status calls, which for us is really important during onboarding. And we start to look at the initial data transfer. So in general, NUS will host a platform for your data sharing, and that will then move us into week two, where the data sharing, the initial data transfer will take place, including any invoices that you've already collected and your active supply contracts. From there, week two is when data entry begins. That time frame will vary based on the availability of data, but that data entry allows NUS to start building out the framework of our portals and our platforms, which will complement the program later on. So from data transfer in week two into week three, we already start to look at new work streams. So typically for a global program, this will be the week that you receive an introduction to the NUS Energy Risk Management team, and will also include a mapping out of priority projects. One thing that we really do during the initial few weeks of the program is look at those supply contracts that you have shared and think, okay, where do we really need to take some quick action and protect the business, whether it's an expiring supply contract or an entirely unhedged position. And then at the end of week three, you will receive a formal status report from your project manager. The implementation, from our experience, is about keeping each other honest and being as transparent as possible. Projects may be ahead of schedule, but others will no doubt be slightly behind schedule. And so being open with the central NUS and client team allows us to renew focus on certain project areas. That then, of course, leads us into week four. By that point, for most NUS global engagements, we've already started to look at training of the NUS Direct portal, populating our portfolio tool, the Trade Track system, implementing or moving into a formal launch, I suppose, of those priority projects that we've assessed in week three, and also looking at historic audit analysis if that's included in the program. So Francesca referenced earlier, we always want to be demonstrating our value, and projects like audit and analysis, quote unquote, quick wins for cost savings are key. And so whilst they may not be identified in, week two or week one, having a roadmap as to when you can expect those types of initiatives and recommendations to be developed is important. And then ultimately, it allows us to move from onboarding phase to steady state. So it gives us a clear view of where we will go together over the next 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 6 months. And again, summarizing what we talked about earlier on in the session, completing this kind of implementation phase often gives all stakeholders, not just at the central level, confidence in that you've made the right decision to choose NUS and that we understand what our priorities are and what our focus is for the coming period. And then it's important to reference back again the international project management team and NUS's local presence. For us, we've been onboarding global clients for a long time now, but even just in the most recent 2, 3, 4 year period, what we have found really sets ourselves apart from competitors is having that local presence and centralized project management. Your project manager will be often the one responsible for moving along the work streams that we identified in the previous slide, but that work could not be delivered without the NUS local offices. Our local consultants, analysts, support staff are critical to the success of any client engagement, particularly a global engagement. So you as the client have the benefit of a centralized single point of contact to advocate for you within NUS, but you also have that huge benefit of NUS's local presence, which again, really important to a program.
Thank you. Okay, so we've come to the end of what we wanted to present to you today. So I'm just going to give you a quick summary. But at this point, I just wanted to mention that we've provided you quite a bit of information, particularly on the last few slides. We wanted to do it in order to show you that, having worked in this industry collectively for a very long time, we have many processes. We have seen the pitfalls. We know, I would say, it's fair to say actually, we know what questions to ask to prioritize work. And we just wanted to lay out the structure of that here. But we will be sharing afterwards the presentation and a little white paper so you can take the time to go through it. And as Sarah mentioned earlier, if you have any questions in the follow-up, please email one of us. But fundamentally, going back to the planning phase, this is the foundation for success. You're pointing that key individual with influence and decision-making authority to work closely with your internal stakeholders is really important. Understanding your portfolio and defining the correct service requirements for your business. That's all part of step one. And then when it comes to transition, we will help facilitate and make this as smooth as possible by sharing all the critical information that will create that one source of truth. It's making sure that you have processes and work streams that will ensure that communication occurs and that things move the way they should do. And obviously, this is all underpinned by a global project management team at NUS Consulting to make it as easy as humanly possible.
Sarah, Francesca, thank you very much. I don't mean to cut you off. I know we have a couple minutes left. There's a couple items that you touched on that I think worth highlighting a little bit as we have just a minute or two to close up. You mentioned the concept of quick wins. I would say, along with timeline, the concept of quick wins seems to be the second highest question that we get. We want quick wins. I think that comes back to alignment, right? In large organizations, as you rightly point out, there are many stakeholders. Some are very enthusiastic about new programs. Some may be a little less enthusiastic, maybe not against it, but less enthusiastic. And the idea of showing value, making an impact, early on in the program certainly does win a lot of people over. And that's something I know you and your team are very sort of focused on early on, whether it's procurement in the sense of picking up supply contracts and looking at critical path renewals, or picking up the risk management and looking at the hedging strategy, or as you rightly point out, the foundation of any project is the data, doing the data validation and looking for opportunities inside the data, all present opportunities as we're ramping up the program. And our goal has always been to provide that feedback to new clients as quickly as possible. One, to keep that enthusiasm and momentum sort of as high as possible as we're going in. Needless to say, every client's different. Sometimes you find many things, sometimes you find less. There's no magic and there's no consistency in any of the clients, but that's part of the program. That's part of, I think, one of the goals as we're going through this process.
Without a doubt.
All right. Sarah, Francesca, anything else you'd like to add before we start to close up?
No, just thank you for everybody's time.
Sorry, there was one question that just popped up. It says the average time is about 34 days, 4 weeks to deploy a project. Um, the question is, in our experience, if somebody is quite large in the sense of scope of project, and they have both manufacturing and retail sites, what is in your experience, does that 34 days change dramatically if you've got, say, maybe 40 or 50 manufacturing sites and maybe a thousand or 1,500 or 2,000 retail sites that go with it?
As you say, Richard, every program is different, and I don't think this question was a setup, but I would
No,
reference our very large client that we onboarded in December 2023. They have more than 2,000 sites, or at the time had just over 2,000 sites. They had distribution centers as well, so a real mix of retail and kind of manufacturing, if you will. The client was unable to transfer any data to NUS as part of their program. And so during Christmas 2023, NUS project teams in 9 offices across Europe worked to onboard that client directly through collection of data from suppliers and utility companies. We onboarded in 14 days. So by the 15th of January, we had onboarded that particular client, and that was through sheer tenacity and collaboration with the client. So we, I suppose, to address the question, we try to ensure that we're giving the correct focus, to the portfolio and identifying, the correct steps that need to be taken. But as you mentioned earlier in the call, Richard, our experience that we've had with other clients really allows us to share that benefit with new clients that are incoming, big or small, all have different challenges.
absolutely right. And I think maybe to toot your horns, since you won't do it, I think that onboarding of that very large client with thousands of sites you did without any paper, if I remember correctly. It was all done electronically, through working with the client and the client's suppliers. So I think the answer to this person's question, who I know, is that yes, it may be a little bit more than 34 days in a project like that, but we're not talking, 6 months or a year. We're talking something between a month and 2 months, so long as we have support from the client side, right? The client is fully engaged, working with us through the process. We're not chasing them down for every, they're reacting and meeting their commitments like we are. I think that an onboarding of a large client like that has both manufacturing and significant retail can be done in something between a month to a month, 2 months, something in that time frame. I hope that answers your question. Um, Yep. Says yes, it's clear. Thank you. So yeah, I think that is clearly our experience. I think, as Sarah pointed out and Francesca pointed out, this is something that's unique to NUS. Our experience and the feedback, and I don't wish to speak ill of anyone, has been that many of our competitors have a quite elongated process of onboarding. And I think that's because they haven't made the commitment that NUS has had to build a specialist group that Sarah leads and Francesca's part of, and there are clearly others in that group that are dedicated to this process, to onboarding new clients, but then staying with the client as we get to steady state, and then helping them manage that and be their point of contact inside of NUS. It's something we maybe learned the hard way many years ago, that although consultants are very good and experts in their particular markets, and clearly the people we rely on to provide expert advice, sometimes consultants are not the best at project management. That is a separate skill, a different skill, and we needed to build that team. And that's what we've done over the last 5, 6, 7 years. And I think the team gets better and better because the experience grows with it. And the more clients that we onboard, the more we're learning from it and being able to do it in a more efficient way. And the goal is to try to pull as much of that away from the client as possible. The more that we can do, and sort of lighten that administrative burden on clients, the faster it goes. Inevitably, we need help from the client. It's not something that we can do without the client, but we understand that the more load we can carry, the faster we can get through that onboarding, that ramp up process. Francesca, Francesca, thank you very much. We're only 2 minutes over, which is, I think, a record for us. I think we've cleaned up all the questions. I want to thank you for the presentation. Thank you for all the materials. We've recorded the session, so we'll make it available to both the people who are on the call and also to those who are unable to make the call. And then Francesca and Sarah will make both the slide deck and any other supporting materials available. We want to thank you for making some time for us today. We try to keep these webinars short and tight so we don't consume too much of your calendar, and look forward to speaking to you at the next webinar. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.